A waiter's act of kindness toward a blind white man results in the unexpected gift of a Ferrari. His joy turns to shock when he's arrested for driving a stolen vehicle. Realizing he's been ensnared in a criminal's deceitful plot, he must work with authorities to track down the mysterious man, uncovering a web of crime that threatens to destroy the city. Welcome to Podcast Stories. I'm your host, Mark Johnson. If you love your family and love to listen to interesting stories like this, subscribe to our channel. And now, put your headphones on and let's dive into this story.
The bustling New York restaurant buzzed with the typical lunch crowd energy. Jamal Thompson moved between tables with practiced efficiency, his notepad ready and a genuine smile that reached his eyes. The restaurant, the Grand Plaza, sat in the heart of Manhattan, its cream-colored walls and dark wood furnishings speaking to old money and tradition. At table 7, an elderly couple struggled with the menu's small print. Without hesitation, Jamal pulled out his phone's flashlight, holding it steady while explaining the day's specials. The woman touched his arm in gratitude, and he noticed her husband's approving nod. These small moments defined Jamal's approach to his work, not just serving food, but creating connections. In the kitchen, Jamal helped Marco, a new busboy, navigate the complex system of table arrangements. "Watch table 12, he advised, arranging plates on his tray. "They always order extra sides after their main course arrives." Marco nodded, grateful for the insight. The kitchen staff respected Jamal. He was the one who remembered everyone's birthday, who covered shifts when emergencies came up, who made the workplace feel like a second home. The lunch rush was winding down when the door chimed. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stood in the entrance, his white cane tapping against the hardwood floor. Other servers hesitated, but Jamal approached immediately. "Welcome to the Grand Plaza, sir. Would you like assistance finding a table?" The man's face turned toward Jamal's voice. "That would be appreciated. Thank you." His voice carried the polish of education and wealth, but without condescension. This was Robert Winchester, though Jamal wouldn't learn his name until later. Jamal offered his arm, describing the restaurant's layout as they walked. "We have a quiet corner table by the window. Well, not that the window matters much to you, sir, but it's away from the kitchen noise." The small joke earned a genuine laugh from Robert. As they reached the table, Jamal pulled out the chair with one fluid motion, guiding Robert's hand to its back. "The menu is available in Braille, sir. I'll fetch it right away." Before Robert could respond, Jamal was already heading to the host stand. Throughout the meal, Jamal's attention to detail impressed Robert. Water glass always full, bread basket replenished without asking, subtle verbal cues about the location of items on the table. "Most servers," Robert commented, "place things down and expect me to find them like a treasure hunt." Their conversation flowed naturally between courses. Robert asked about Jamal's background, showing genuine interest in his stories about growing up in Brooklyn, his mother's determination to send him to college, and his current night classes in business administration. "You know," Robert said, finishing his coffee, "kindness like yours is rare in this city. People usually help because they expect something in return." He folded his napkin with precise movements. "One day, I'll do something significant for you, Jamal. Something that matches the genuine care you've shown today." Jamal smiled, used two generous promises from wealthy patrons that rarely materialized. "That's very kind of you, sir, but helping people is just what I do. No reward necessary." He cleared the coffee cup, noticing Robert's thoughtful expression. "No, I insist," Robert replied, his tone carrying unexpected weight. "People like you deserve recognition. You'll see." He stood, unfolding his cane with practiced ease. As Jamal watched Robert leave, he felt a mixture of warmth and subtle unease. The man's promise seemed excessive for simple courtesy, but Jamal dismissed the feeling. In New York, you learned to take kind words at face value and nothing more. He returned to his routine, unaware that this interaction would soon append his entire life. The rest of his shift passed normally, filled with the usual mix of demanding customers, decent tips, and camaraderie with his co-workers. If Jamal had known what that simple act of kindness would trigger, he might have called in sick that day. But fate has a way of finding us, especially when we're just trying to do the right thing. The morning sun had barely touched the grimy buildings of Jamal's neighborhood when he stepped out of his apartment building for his morning shift. He stopped dead in his tracks. There, gleaming like a mirage against the backdrop of graffiti and worn concrete, sat a Ferrari F8 Tributo in pristine candy apple red. At first, Jamal walked past it, assuming some wealthy person had gotten lost in this part of town. But then he noticed the envelope tucked under the windshield wiper, marked with his name in elegant script. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. "Dear Jamal," the note read, "your kindness deserves recognition. Consider this a token of my appreciation. The papers are in the glove compartment. Enjoy it." Robert Winchester. Jamal stood there, reading the note 3 times. Inside the glove compartment, he found registration papers, insurance documents, and a key fob, all in his name. The documentation looked legitimate, but something felt surreal about the situation. A $300,000 car for helping someone to their table. Despite his reservations, temptation won out. Jamal pressed the start button, and the engine roared to life, drawing curious onlookers from neighboring buildings. The leather seat embraced him like butter, the dashboard displaying more technology than he'd ever seen in a vehicle. He pulled away from the curb carefully, hyper-aware of every movement. The car responded to the slightest touch, purring through the streets of his neighborhood. People stopped to stare, phones raised to capture videos. Jamal felt simultaneously powerful and exposed, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. The first 20 minutes passed without incident. Jamal began to relax, even enjoying the way the car handled the curves. He was considering taking it for a quick spin on the highway when red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. 2 police cars boxed him in, forcing him to pull over. Jamal's heart raced, but he remained calm, knowing he had the paperwork. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel as officers approached from both sides, weapons drawn. "Step out of the vehicle slowly, hands where we can see them." The command came through a megaphone, drawing even more attention to the scene. Jamal complied, moving with deliberate slowness. "Officer, I can explain." "I have the paperwork," Jamal started, but was cut off as he was roughly spun around and pressed against the car's hood. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, while his partner retrieved the documents from the glove compartment. "This vehicle was reported stolen from the Winchester estate last night. Did you really think you could get away with this?" Jamal's protests fell on deaf ears. The registration papers, which had looked so legitimate earlier, were declared forgeries. His explanation about Robert's gift sounded hollow even to his own ears. Who gives away a Ferrari to a waiter? The ride to the police station passed in a blur. Jamal watched through the patrol car's window as his neighborhood receded, replaced by the sterile downtown landscape. The precinct building loomed ahead, its gray facade a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. Processing was a humiliation Jamal had never experienced before. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal belongings, catalogued and stored in a manila envelope. The cell they placed him in held to other men who eyed him with mild curiosity before returning to their own troubles. Sitting on the hard bench, Jamal replayed every interaction with Robert. The seemingly genuine appreciation, the promise of recognition, the perfectly prepared paperwork. None of it added up. Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths just to frame a waiter for Grand Theft Auto? As night fell, Jamal lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights never turned off, creating an eternal twilight that made time lose all meaning. His one phone call had gone to his mother, who promised to contact anyone who might help. But as the hours ticked by, the weight of his situation pressed harder on his chest. What had started as a dream morning had transformed into his worst nightmare. The Ferrari, which had felt like a symbol of recognition and success just hours ago, now seemed like a carefully baited trap. But why him? What could Robert possibly gain from this elaborate setup? The fluorescent lights of the holding cell cast harsh shadows as Jamal sat alone, his initial shock giving way to analytical thinking. 3 days had passed since his arrest, and each hour brought new clarity about his interaction with Robert. Small details that seemed insignificant at the restaurant now took on sinister meaning. He remembered how Robert had asked specific questions about his background, his family, his education. At the time, it felt like friendly interest, but now Jamal recognized it as reconnaissance. Robert had been assessing his vulnerability, measuring his suitability as a target. Even the man's blindness began to feel suspicious. Had it been an act to lower Jamal's guard? The sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor interrupted his thoughts. A guard appeared, accompanied by a woman in a crisp navy suit. "Thompson, your lawyer's here," the guard announced, though Jamal hadn't called any lawyer. "I'm Detective Sarah Chen," the woman said. Once they were seated in the interview room, her badge glinted under the institutional lighting. "Something about your case doesn't add up, and I'd like to hear your version." Jamal studied her face, looking for signs of deception. He'd had enough of trust for 1 week. Why would a detective care about my case? Rich guy's car gets stolen, poor black guy gets caught driving it. Seems pretty straightforward to most people. Sarah pulled out a folder, spreading photographs across the table. They showed Robert Winchester at various charity events, always in the background, always watching. Because Robert Winchester isn't just a wealthy philanthropist. We've been tracking his activities for months, but we can never get close enough. Until now, the photos revealed a pattern. In each image, someone like Jamal, working class, minority, responsible, stood near Robert, usually receiving some form of recognition or award. Sarah pulled out another set of photos. These showed the same people months later, being led away in handcuffs or standing before judges. "He picks people like you," Sarah explained, her voice low and intense. "People with clean records, good reputations in their communities. He builds them up, gives them something spectacular, then pulls the rug out. Every single one of them ended up in prison." Jamal's throat felt dry. But why? What does he get out of it? "That's what we need your help to find out." Sarah leaned forward. "We can protect you, but you'll have to trust me. Are you willing to help us investigate him?" Trust was a commodity Jamal couldn't afford to give away easily anymore. But as he looked at the evidence spread before him, he realized he had little choice. "What exactly would I need to do?" Sarah outlined their plan. They would arrange his release on bail, make it look like a procedural error. Meanwhile, Jamal would return to work, maintain his normal routine, but keep his eyes open for any contact from Robert or his associates. "The key is to act natural," Sarah emphasized. "If he thinks you're onto him, we'll lose our chance. We need to understand his operation from the inside." As they discussed the details, Jamal shared everything he could remember about his interactions with Robert, the way he moved, specific phrases he used, any names he mentioned. Sarah took detailed notes, occasionally nodding when information aligned with their existing intelligence. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, pulling out a final document. "We found similar cases in Chicago, Boston, and Los Angeles. Always the same pattern, always targeting people in service industries who showed him exceptional kindness." The scope of Robert's operation began to dawn on Jamal. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about stopping someone who systematically destroyed good people's lives. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. But for the first time since his arrest, he felt a sense of purpose. "I'll do it," Jamal said finally. "But I need to know everything you know about him. No surprises." Sarah smiled, a mix of relief and determination crossing her face. "Of course, we're partners in this now." She began pulling out more files, and they spent the next hours building a comprehensive picture of their target. As Jamal absorbed the information, his fear transformed into resolve. Robert had picked him because of his kindness, assuming it meant weakness. That was his first mistake. Now, that same kindness would fuel Jamal's determination to protect others from falling into Robert's trap. In the week following his release, Jamal and Sarah dove deep into Robert Winchester's past. They set up their makeshift investigation headquarters in a forgotten conference room at the precinct, walls covered with documents, photographs, and financial records. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a complex web of transactions displayed on her laptop. Every charitable donation Robert makes is followed by a series of smaller withdrawals from offshore accounts. The amounts always total exactly double the donation. Jamal leaned closer, studying the pattern. "Money laundering, we think so. He donates $1 million to a children's hospital, gets $2 million in cleaned money back. But proving it has been impossible. The paper trail always goes cold." They had spent hours at one of Robert's primary charitable organizations, Hope Forward Foundation, under the guise of writing a profile piece for a local newspaper. The foundation's offices occupied a modest building in Queens, its walls lined with photos of smiling beneficiaries and framed thank you letters. The office manager, Ellen Martinez, had been eager to share success stories. "Mr. Winchester insisted our administrative costs stay below 10%, she'd told them proudly. "Almost everything goes directly to helping people." But as they dug deeper, the numbers didn't add up. Sarah pulled up the foundation's tax returns. "See these equipment purchases? They're all from companies that don't exist, and the addresses listed for their offices. They're all empty lots or abandoned buildings." Jamal remembered something from his business administration classes. Shell companies. For moving the money, exactly. But Winchester's clever. He mixes legitimate charitable work with the fraud. Some people really do get help, which makes exposing him even harder. Their breakthrough came when they interviewed a former accountant from one of the charities. The man, nervously glancing over his shoulder every few minutes, revealed how the scheme worked. "Winchester targets people like you, Jamal, not just for the frame-ups, but to distract from the larger operation. Every time one of you gets arrested, media attention focuses on the human interest story, the betrayed Good Samaritan. Meanwhile, millions move through his network unnoticed." The documentation the accountant provided was damning. Spreadsheets showed systematic fraud spanning years, each charitable donation serving as cover for larger financial crimes. But the most shocking discovery was a pattern they hadn't noticed before. The timing of the frame-ups, Sarah said, spreading out a timeline. Each one coincides with a major investigation getting close to his operation. "You weren't just a random target, Jamal. Someone must have tipped him off about our investigation." This revelation changed everything. They weren't just building a case against a corrupt philanthropist. They were dealing with someone who had infiltrated law enforcement. The stakes were higher than they'd imagined. Late one night, as they pored over more documents, Sarah discovered a crucial link. These shell companies, they all traced back to a holdings corporation called Visionary Ventures. And guess who sits on their board? The name she pointed to made Jamal's blood run cold. James Morrison, the police commissioner's brother-in-law. The corruption reached higher than they'd imagined. "We need to be careful now," Sarah warned. "We can't trust anyone in the department except my direct supervisor, Captain Rodriguez. He's the one who first suspected Winchester's operation." They compiled their evidence meticulously. Bank records, witness statements, shell company documentation. But they knew it wouldn't be enough. They needed to catch Winchester in the act, to document a direct connection between his charitable giving and the money laundering operation. "There's an annual charity gala next month," Sarah noted, pulling up an invitation. "Every major donor and beneficiary will be there, including Winchester." Jamal studied the invitation. "And you think we can get proof there?" "It's our best shot, but we'll need help." Sarah pulled out her phone. "I know a journalist who's been investigating corruption in charitable organizations. He might be interested in this story." As they formulated their plan, Jamal couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Robert had chosen him because of his helpful nature, expecting him to be an easy target. Instead, that same quality had helped him build the alliance that might finally bring the corrupt philanthropist down. The pressure of leading a double life began to weigh heavily on Jamal. Back at work, he fielded constant questions from co-workers and regular customers about his arrest and release. The local community had rallied behind him, organizing protests outside the police station and starting a GoFundMe for his legal defense. "You're like our neighborhood hero now," said Mrs. Washington, a regular customer who'd known him since he started working at the restaurant. "Standing up to those rich folks who think they can push us around." She patted his hand as he refilled her coffee, her eyes full of pride. The support was overwhelming, but it also filled Jamal with guilt. He couldn't tell them about the investigation, couldn't warn them that their faith in him might be shaken when the full story came out. Each word of encouragement felt like another weight added to his shoulders. During his break, he found Sarah waiting in her unmarked car around the corner. These clandestine meetings had become routine, but today she looked troubled. "The community support is complicating things," she said, showing him social media posts about his case. "Winchester's people are watching. They'll expect you to be angry, desperate. All this support makes you look too confident." Jamal slumped in the passenger seat. "What am I supposed to do? Tell people to stop supporting me?" "No, but we need to be careful. Winchester didn't become successful by being careless. He's probably wondering why you haven't tried to contact him, why you're not begging for help." Their conversation shifted to personal matters, as it often did during these meetings. Sarah shared stories about her own struggles as an Asian American woman in law enforcement. The constant pressure to prove herself. "My father wanted me to be a doctor," she said, smiling ruefully. "When I told him I was joining the police academy, he didn't speak to me for a year. Now he brags about me to his friends. But it took time." Jamal found himself opening up about his own family. His mother's determination to keep him in school despite working 3 jobs, his younger sister's college dreams, the responsibility he felt to make their sacrifices worthwhile. "That's why this case matters so much," he admitted. "It's not just about clearing my name anymore. It's about showing them that doing the right thing really does matter in the end." Sarah's hand found his briefly, a gesture of understanding rather than romance. They'd grown close over the past weeks, but both recognized that their connection was forged by circumstances rather than choice. The moment was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing. Her contact at the newspaper had sent crucial information about the upcoming gala. "Winchester's planning something big," she said, scanning the message. "The guest list includes CEOs from major banks, hedge fund managers, even a senator. Whatever he's doing with the charity money, he's about to scale up." They spent the next hour strategizing. The gala would be their best chance to gather evidence, but it would also be the riskiest moment of the investigation. One wrong move could not only destroy their case, but potentially put their lives in danger. As Jamal walked back to the restaurant, he noticed whispers and pointing from passers-by who recognized him from the news. Their supportive smiles felt like accusations now. He'd become a symbol of resistance against wealth and privilege, but the truth was far more complicated. That night, alone in his apartment, Jamal read through the comments on the GoFundMe page. People had donated their rent money, their children's school supplies, funds, believing in his innocence. The responsibility of their trust kept him awake long into the night. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Remember, we're not just fighting Winchester. We're fighting for every person he's hurt, and everyone he might hurt in the future. Stay strong." The message helped, but as Jamal finally drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of their journey still lay ahead. The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and old money. Jamal adjusted his borrowed tuxedo, feeling like an actor in a play he hadn't rehearsed for. Sarah stood across the room in a midnight blue evening gown, barely recognizable, with her hair styled and makeup perfectly applied. They'd arrived separately, as planned. "Champagne, sir," A server offered, and Jamal took a glass to blend in, remembering how many times he'd been on the other side of that interaction. The irony wasn't lost on him. The city's elite filled the room, hedge fund managers in custom suits, society women dripping in diamonds, politicians wearing practiced smiles. Jamal recognized some faces from the financial newspapers he'd studied during their investigation. Each one represented a potential connection to Winchester's scheme. Robert Winchester made his entrance 40 minutes into the event, assisted by a young woman who Jamal now knew was actually his personal assistant and financial coordinator. The blind man act was still in full effect, but Jamal noticed something he'd missed before: the subtle way Robert's head turned toward conversations across the room, tracking movements that a truly blind person wouldn't notice. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice carried over the crowd. "Please welcome our host and founder of the Hope Forward Foundation, Mr. Robert Winchester." Applause filled the room. Jamal clapped along, watching Sarah position herself near one of the emergency exits. Their journalist contact, Michael Chen, no relation to Sarah, worked the room with his press credentials, snapping photos and making small talk. "Jamal," Robert's voice cut through the ambient noise. "I thought I recognized your voice. What an unexpected pleasure." Jamal's heart raced, but years of customer service had taught him to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Winchester, I'm surprised you remember me. How could I forget? Especially after that unfortunate misunderstanding with my car." Robert's smile never wavered. "I hope there are no hard feelings. Sometimes our best intentions have unintended consequences." The threat in his words was clear, but Jamal maintained his composure. "Actually, I've been meaning to thank you. The experience taught me a lot about trust and appearances." Something flickered across Robert's face. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. He hadn't expected this response. "Indeed. Well, I'd love to hear more about your insights. Would you join me at my table?" Meanwhile, Sarah had engaged Robert's assistant in conversation, steering her toward the bar. Michael Chen circulated closer, his camera catching every interaction while appearing to photograph the general crowd. "You know," Jamal said, following Robert to his table, "I've been reading about your charitable work. It's impressive how you manage to help so many people while maintaining such low administrative costs." Robert's hand tightened slightly on his cane. "You've been researching me. After your generous gift, I wanted to learn more about my benefactor. The financial structures you've created are fascinating, especially visionary ventures." The name drop had its intended effect. Robert's composed facade cracked slightly. "Young man, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'd be careful about making accusations you can't support." "Oh, I'm not making accusations," Jamal replied calmly, "just expressing admiration for your system. The way you use legitimate charitable donations to clean money from less legitimate sources. It's brilliant, really." Robert leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you have any idea what happens to people who interfere with my business? That car frame-up was just a warning. Don't make me escalate this." Jamal noticed Sarah signaling from across the room. She'd gotten what they needed from the assistant. Michael Chen had positioned himself within earshot, his phone recording every word. "Actually, Mr. Winchester, I do know what happens to people who cross you. I've met them, and that's exactly why I'm here." The tension at the table could have been cut with a knife. Robert's usual smooth demeanor had transformed into something harder, more dangerous. Around them, the gala continued in full swing, oblivious to the confrontation unfolding in their midst. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced, "Mr. Winchester will now address our generous donors." Robert stood, his movements deliberate. "We'll finish this conversation later," he muttered to Jamal before making his way to the podium. Sarah caught Jamal's eye from across the room and gave a subtle nod. Their evidence was secured. As Robert took the stage, his transformation was remarkable. The threatening figure from moments ago vanished, replaced by the benevolent philanthropist everyone expected to see. The camera lights flashed as he gripped the podium, his unseeing eyes somehow managing to scan the crowd. "My friends," Robert began, his voice warm and engaging, "tonight we celebrate not just our foundation's success, but the power of human kindness." Jamal felt his phone vibrate. A text from Sarah. "Got it. Assistant confessed everything. Signal when ready." Michael Chen positioned himself near the front, camera ready. They had planned this moment carefully, but Jamal's hands still trembled slightly as he stood. Everything hinged on the next few minutes. "Through your generosity," Robert continued, "we've helped countless families, built schools, funded medical research. Tell them about the families you've destroyed." "Robert," Jamal's voice cut through the silence. The room froze. "Tell them about the people you've framed, the lives you've ruined to cover your tracks." Security started moving toward him, but Sarah was faster. She stepped forward, badge raised. "NYPD, nobody move." Michael Chen's camera whirred, continuously, capturing everything. Robert maintained his composure, though his knuckles whitened on the podium. "This man is clearly disturbed. Security, please remove him." "Actually," Sarah projected her voice across the ballroom, "we have evidence of extensive money laundering through the Hope Forward Foundation. Your assistant has already provided a full statement." The crowd erupted in whispers. Robert's mask slipped further. "These are baseless accusations. I've dedicated my life to helping others." Jamal moved closer to the stage. "You dedicated your life to using others. Every act of kindness was just cover for your crimes. The foundation, the donations, even your blindness, it's all an act." "You can't prove any of this," Robert snarled, dropping the blind man act entirely as his eyes focused directly on Jamal. Sarah held up her phone. "We have banking records, witness statements, and your assistant's confession. It's over, Robert." The crowd's whispers turned to gasps as Robert's carefully constructed persona crumbled. Several prominent donors began edging toward the exits, not wanting to be associated with the unfolding scandal. "You don't understand." Robert's voice took on a desperate edge. "The foundation does real good. The money we clean helps fund everything. Without it, thousands of people lose support." "You're right," Jamal replied, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "The foundation does help people. That's what makes this worse. You took something good and poisoned it with greed." Police officers began filtering into the ballroom, Sarah's backup arriving right on schedule. Robert looked around wildly, like a cornered animal. For a moment, Jamal thought he might try to run. Instead, Robert laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think this changes anything? There will always be another foundation, another charity. The system runs on dirty money. I just made it work more efficiently." "Maybe," Jamal agreed, watching the officers approach, "but not through you. Not anymore." As the police led Robert away, the ballroom erupted in chaos. Reporters who'd been covering the gala rushed forward, cameras flashing. Sarah coordinated with her fellow officers, while Michael Chen conducted rapid interviews with shocked donors. The evidence they'd gathered was irrefutable. Robert's assistant had provided access to the foundation's true financial records. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the systematic targeting of Good Samaritans. It was all documented. The ballroom descended into controlled chaos. Wealthy donors rushed to distance themselves from the scandal, nearly trampling each other in their haste to reach the exits. Photographers' flashes created a strobe light effect, capturing the precise moment when New York's elite philanthropy circuit imploded. Robert, now in handcuffs, maintained his composure, even as officers led him through the crowd. "You have no idea what you've done," he called out to Jamal. "The foundation supports thousands of people. Their suffering is on your hands now." The words were calculated to strike at Jamal's conscience, but Sarah stepped forward. "The real foundation accounts will be frozen temporarily, but legitimate charitable operations will continue under court supervision. You're not as indispensable as you think, Robert." Police officers methodically worked through the room, preventing anyone from leaving before giving statements. Several prominent figures who had been closest to Robert were pulled aside for more detailed questioning. Among them, Jamal recognized board members from Visionary Ventures, their expensive suits now wrinkled with nervous sweat. Michael Chen worked the room like a man possessed, his camera capturing every moment of the unraveling. "Mr. Winchester," he called out, "how long have you been using charitable donations to launder money for organized crime?" Robert's mask finally cracked completely. "You want to know how long?" he snarled, turning toward the cameras with startling accuracy for a supposedly blind man. "Ask your precious police department. Ask your politicians. They've known for years. They all take their cut." The outburst sent another wave of chaos through the crowd. Several city officials present at the gala suddenly became very interested in their phones, while others made hurried calls to their lawyers. Sarah's team moved with practiced efficiency, securing computers, phones, and documents from the foundation's offices set up at the gala. Robert's assistant, now in protective custody, had provided them with access codes to the foundation's secure servers. "The money trail goes everywhere," Sarah explained to Jamal as they watched the scene unfold. "Banks, investment firms, political campaigns. This isn't just about Robert anymore. We've kicked over a hornet's nest." The evidence was staggering in its scope. Robert hadn't just been running a simple money laundering operation. He'd created an entire shadow financial system, using charitable giving as both cover and mechanism for moving illegal funds. Local news crews had arrived, broadcasting live from outside the hotel. The story was already breaking across social media, with clips of Robert's confession going viral. Hashtags like #WinchesterScandal and #CharityFraud were trending. "We need to get you out of here," Sarah told Jamal, noticing several suspicious figures watching from the corners of the ballroom. "Robert has connections we don't even know about yet. You're not safe." But before they could move, a distinguished older man approached them. Jamal recognized him as Judge Harrison, known for his tough stance on white-collar crime. "Detective Chen," the judge addressed Sarah, "I think we're going to need a special prosecutor for this one. The implications are extensive." The judge's words confirmed their suspicions. This case would reach far beyond Robert Winchester. The foundation had been just the tip of an iceberg of corruption that reached into every corner of the city's power structure. As they finally left the ballroom, Jamal caught one last glimpse of Robert being led to a police vehicle. The man's perfectly tailored suit was wrinkled, his confident posture replaced by a defeated slump. Their eyes met briefly, and Jamal saw something he didn't expect. Respect. "You know," Robert called out, "I chose you because you were kind. I thought that made you weak. I've never been so wrong in my life." The statement hung in the air as the police car pulled away, its lights reflecting off the hotel's glass facade. Around them, the city hummed with the energy of a breaking scandal, but for Jamal, the moment felt strangely quiet. In the weeks following the gala, Jamal's life transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. His neighborhood welcomed him back as a hero, but this time for exposing real corruption rather than being its victim. The GoFundMe money, which he'd feared would become a source of shame, was redirected with donors' permissions to create a community support program. One morning, as he sat in his usual coffee shop, Sarah joined him with a thick manila envelope. "The DA's office finished processing the foundation's records," she said, sliding into the booth. "You should see this." Inside were photographs of the foundation's actual beneficiaries, children who'd received medical care, families given housing assistance, students awarded scholarships, real people who'd been helped by dirty money. "The foundation's legitimate operations will continue," Sarah explained. "A court-appointed administrator is separating the clean programs from the money laundering scheme. Most of the honest employees will keep their jobs." Jamal studied the photos, remembering Robert's final words about the foundation's beneficiaries. So maybe some good can come from all this after all. "More than that," Sarah smiled, pulling out another document. "The FBI wants to use this case as a template for investigating other charitable organizations suspected of similar schemes. They're calling it the Winchester Protocol. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Robert's methodology for corrupting charities would now be used to protect them. Later that day, Jamal met with community leaders at his local church. The room was packed with people he'd known his whole life, plus some faces he recognized from the news coverage of his case. "We need to talk about what comes next," Reverend Jenkins began. "This scandal has shown us how vulnerable our community is to exploitation, but it's also shown us our strength." The discussion that followed was intense and productive. Ideas flowed freely. A community oversight board for local charities, financial literacy programs, partnerships with legitimate foundations. Jamal found himself taking notes, his business administration classes finally finding practical application. Sarah arrived halfway through the meeting, slipping quietly into the back row. She'd been spending more time in the neighborhood lately, building connections beyond their investigation. The community had been skeptical of her at first, another cop in their midst, but her dedication to the case had won them over. "What we really need," one elderly resident suggested, "is our own foundation, one that's transparent, accountable to the community. No more outsiders deciding what's best for us." The idea resonated. By meeting's end, they had the beginnings of a plan. They would create the Forward Truth Foundation, using the lessons learned from exposing Robert's scheme to build something genuine. "It won't be easy," Sarah cautioned as they walked home. "Setting up a legitimate foundation takes time, resources, oversight. Good thing I know a detective who specializes in foundation oversight." Jamal smiled. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Not romance, but a deep partnership based on shared purpose. That evening, Jamal received an unexpected call from Michael Chen. The journalist had been digging deeper into Robert's network, uncovering connections to similar operations in other cities. "This story is bigger than we thought," Michael explained. "Other journalists are finding the same patterns across the country. Your case broke the dam. People are finally paying attention." The news should have been satisfying, but Jamal felt the weight of responsibility growing. Each new revelation brought more attention, more expectations, more pressure to prove that exposing corruption wasn't enough. You had to build something better in its place. As he prepared for bed that night, Jamal found the original note that had come with the Ferrari, Robert's first attempt to entrap him. He'd kept it as evidence, but now it served a different purpose. It reminded him how a single act of kindness had cascaded into something much larger. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension on the morning of Robert Winchester's sentencing. 3 months of trials had revealed the full scope of his operation. Over $500 million laundered through various charities, dozens of innocent people framed, and a network of corruption that had reached into every level of city government. Jamal sat in the front row beside Sarah, watching Robert at the defendant's table. The formerly immaculate philanthropist now wore an orange jumpsuit, his carefully maintained facade stripped away. He no longer pretended to be blind. "The defendant will rise," the judge announced. Robert stood, shoulders straight, despite everything. The courtroom fell silent. "Mr. Winchester, your crimes represent an unprecedented betrayal of public trust. You didn't just steal money, you poisoned the very concept of charitable giving. Your actions have made people question every act of kindness, wonder about the motives behind every generous gesture." As the judge continued, Jamal noticed movement at the courtroom entrance. A man in a well-cut suit slipped in, taking a seat in the back. He recognized him from their investigation. James Morrison, the police commissioner's brother-in-law, now turned state's evidence. "In light of your cooperation in exposing other members of your network," the judge continued, "this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. The sentence fell like a gavel itself. Robert showed no reaction, but his attorney's shoulders slumped slightly. As officers led him out, Robert paused beside Jamal's row. "You were right," he said quietly. "The foundation did good work. Maybe you can do better." Before Jamal could respond, Robert was gone, disappearing through the heavy wooden doors for the last time. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Michael Chen, now working for a major network, pushed through to get their official statement. This case wasn't just about Robert Winchester, Jamal told the cameras. It was about trust, about how we help each other. The Forward Truth Foundation will show that transparency and genuine charity can coexist. As if on cue, Sarah received a text. The new foundation's first major grant had been approved. They would be taking over several of Winchester's legitimate programs, but with complete community oversight and transparency. The real surprise came later that evening. The journalist who had helped them at the gala revealed his true identity, Marcus Sterling, a former business partner of Robert's, who had been quietly gathering evidence for years. "I lost everything when I first tried to expose him," Marcus explained over coffee. "My reputation, my business, my family. But watching you stand up to him, seeing how the community rallied around you, it gave me the courage to finally come forward." Marcus's testimony had been crucial in connecting all the pieces, showing how Robert's scheme had evolved over decades. Now, he wanted to help ensure it never happened again. "I'm establishing a watchdog organization," he announced. "We'll monitor charitable foundations, investigate suspicious patterns, protect whistleblowers. Will you help?" The offer was unexpected but fitting. Jamal and Sarah exchanged glances, both recognizing the opportunity to expand their impact beyond New York. "One condition," Jamal said, "we keep it connected to the communities we serve. No ivory tower oversight." Marcus agreed readily. "That's exactly why I came to you. We need people who understand both sides, the financial structures and the human impact." As they left the coffee shop, Sarah pointed out a newspaper headline: "Winchester Scandal Prompts National Charity Reform." The article detailed new legislation being proposed to prevent similar schemes. "You know," she said, "when we started this investigation, I thought we were just chasing one corrupt millionaire. Instead, we started a movement." Jamal nodded, watching people hurry past on the busy street. Each face represented someone who might need help someday, someone who deserved to trust that help when it came. Robert thought kindness was weakness, he reflected, but kindness, real kindness, takes more strength than he ever understood. They walked on through the city they'd helped change, knowing their work was just beginning. The Forward Truth Foundation would open its doors next week, starting a new chapter in a story that had begun with a simple act of helping a seemingly blind man to his table.